Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Carter and General Dempsey, for being here and for your commitment. General Dempsey, you testified before the House Armed Services Committee that, I quote, "I would not recommend we put U.S. forces in harm's way," we're talking about Iraq, "simply to stiffen the spine of local forces." And you continued, "If their spine is not stiffened by the threat of ISIL on their way of life, nothing we do is going to stiffen their spine." So, General Dempsey, what is it going to take to stiffen the spines of the local forces?
Yeah, actually, Senator, what I said was that if it takes us to stiffen their spine in the face of a threat that is existential to them, then it doesn't seem to me that they're going to be stiffened. But I do think there are, if you ask me, the things that we are doing, I mentioned a few of them earlier, about expanding our network of points where we touch them, help them train, help them target, help them understand how they integrate with each other, Army and police. I think those things have had the effect of giving them greater confidence. I just made the point that I don't think the added step of accompanying them into combat would make a strategic difference, except if we get to the point where there's a major offensive that we think will only or could be increased in terms of its probability of success by our presence.
So as far as you're concerned, we are doing those, taking those steps that will enable them to be able to fight for themselves. Because I agree with you that there is no number of our troops that we can send there that will result in a lasting kind of situation. You also talked about your recent trip to Israel, where you discussed various scenarios involving Assad's departure. I don't know whether Assad's departure is anywhere in the near future, but let's assume that there is a departure. How would his departure affect the dynamics of what happens in Syria? Would ISIL step in to fill the power vacuum? And how would Assad's departure change our strategy regarding ISIL?
So let me tell you about our military planning efforts. Our Israeli counterparts and our Jordanian counterparts very much believe that the possibility of either the regime collapsing or enclaving itself in Tartus, Latakia, Homs, and Hana is possible. And so they were very eager to have consultations with us about what that would precipitate. And your description of it is one that at least our regional partners express, which is to say we don't want this to be a foot race, if it occurs, between al-Nusra and ISIL and Ansar all of these other groups converging on Damascus. I won't sit here today and tell you that I have the answer to that, but I will tell you that we're in consultations, even as I sit here, with the Turks, the Israelis, and the Jordanians about that scenario.
Well, so what you're doing is to prepare for that possible eventuality and to ensure that these other groups do not just step in and take over. But if let's say that, well, let me put it this way: if Assad departs, does that somehow make our mission against ISIL simpler, easier to target? Is that a way to think about it?
Okay, I'm on a roll. That's a subject of great debate, actually. The debate framed somewhat this way: is the presence of Assad the catalyst for these issues, these radical ideologies and violent extremist organizations, or did they emanate somehow else and they simply use the presence of the Assad regime as a recruiting tool? Depending on how you answer that question, will largely shape how you think about solving the problems. The situation militarily is such that what we're trying to provide with partners is options. That is to say, we're trying to form a network of partners that we may not have conceived before, like the YPG, the Syrian Kurds in and around Kobani and over to the east bank of the Euphrates River. We're trying to provide options that will allow us to shape and to react depending on what the internal situation, how it evolves. And we're working most closely with those who border Syria who have, again, the most to gain and the most to lose.
Turning to the training that we're doing with the moderate Syrian forces, we recognize that you're having great difficulty while training not only the Syrians but also in Iraq. And you've described this as a generational challenge. So while we're slowly training the local forces to fight for themselves, what are some of the other things that we need to be doing contemporaneously? Is it those 9 action items that need to be occurring at the same time as the training is?
It is. For
Senator
example, Senator, if I may, in recognition of the fact that it's going to take some time to build the forces that defeat ISIL on the territory of Syria and Iraq, that's a fact. We're going to do that, and I'm sure we'll be successful at that, but it's going to take some time. We need to defend ourselves in the meantime, because there are parts of ISIL that would like to attack us and our friends around the world, and that's where Homeland Security and the FBI and the rest of our efforts to protect ourselves come in. So on the one hand, we need to go to the territory where ISIL arose and defeat it there, and we will do that. But at the same time, and in the meantime, we need to continue to defend our people and our country against these guys. And some of them have the ambition to go to Syria, train, and come back to the United States. You see that already in Europe. We see some signs of that in the United States, and that's why I was so laborious in describing the 9 lines of effort. The ones we're talking about that we have principal responsibility are 2 of those 9, but the others really are critical as well, because as Senator Cotton said a moment ago, ISIL is a grave threat. These guys do want to do us harm, and our friends and allies in the region. If I can say something about this, you asked about the Assad regime, and the chairman answered that. Obviously, what we would like to see occur is for Assad to leave the scene, but for the state of Syria not to disintegrate completely, because we know what's down that road, sectarian disintegration. And now that is a diplomatic task that is underway, as the chairman indicated. And that is the outcome that would be by far preferable, I think, not only for the United States and our national security interests, but for the people of Syria who are suffering so terribly now. There's so many refugees, and it's really a tragic situation in the human sense. But Assad needs to go, but the structures of governance need to stay, or we hope they will stay, because we know what life is like without structures of governance in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, first of all, let me just say thank you for your service to the country. We find ourselves, as you have stated, in a very precarious position in a number of areas. General Dempsey, as I sat here and listened to your assessment of the world today, from your point of view, it was alarming to find that location after location we find ourselves being challenged, and we find ourselves being pressured into positions that perhaps 10 years ago we would not have found ourselves in, whether it be with regard to the Pacific Rim areas or whether it be find ourselves in the Ukraine area and so forth. Our challenges are many, and yet at the same time, it doesn't appear that this has come in as a surprise. As you move farther along, and specifically into the area that we had today, which was in terms of our challenges with ISIL and defeating ISIL, it seems to me that we found ourselves once again in a position where there really weren't surprises. But I'm just curious. The Secretary stated that in Iraq, the Iraqi security forces were severely degraded after 4 divisions dissolved and Mosul fell a year ago this June. The Secretary wasn't in his position at the time. You were, sir. Was that a surprise to you?
Well, they collapsed because of poor governance and sectarianism. I was surprised at at the rapidity of it. And I suppose I would suggest to you that the degree to which the leadership had been changed out for all the wrong reasons by the Maliki government were the conditions under which that occurred.
If the 4 divisions that were lost there, if they were there today, would 4 divisions, does that make a difference between us moving forward with the defeat of ISIS, or is that not the right number? What's the right number that it's going to take in terms of boots on the ground, not American boots on the ground, but literally allied forces on the ground? What's the number that it takes in order to move forward with whatever strategies are in place, if there are strategies in place, and I'm assuming that we'll get into that, but what's the number that we want to see in the ground?
The commander of CENTCOM has testified that to recapture Mosul eventually, he believes he will need approximately 9 brigades worth of security forces, 6 from the government of Iraq and 3 from the Kurdish region. That would be for Mosul. And then, of course, restoration of the border, which would be the ultimate step, restoration of their sovereign territory defined as the border between Syria and Iraq. That would be largely a federal police or border issue, and I'm not aware that that number has been identified. But the initial goal is to form or re-equip 9 brigades.
What's the time frame that could be accomplished in?
That putting a temporal dimension on this is risky at best because the campaign is dependent on a coalition and it's dependent on the network of actors that include the Sunni tribes, the Iraqi security forces themselves, the counter-terror service, and the Kurds. The act of describing when those groups could all come together to establish the conditions to do this is just difficult to pin down. Even if I knew the answer to that question, I would be loath to report it to you in an open hearing. But I've said that from the beginning that it was probably a 3-year effort to restore sovereignty to Iraq, and we're 8 months into that.
You know, General, we pride ourselves and we point out the fact that we truly do have the greatest fighting force the world has ever seen. And yet right now we find ourselves, as the president stated some time ago, he called ISIS the JV team. Clearly that's not the position that I think the administration would take today. We've identified that they are clearly a threat. We've identified a 9-point plan here, Mr. Secretary, in which you've identified all of the things that have to happen, including the defense of our country from these individuals. At what point during this 3-year time frame, or what is the possibility during this 3-year time frame that the patience that you've shown, General, and that the Secretary has alluded to here to build this up, what is the probability that this time frame gets away from us? What are we in a position to make this thing last for 3 years without literally upping on our own point in order to defend ourselves? At what point does it look like we're going to have to amp this thing up using our own resources to a greater degree than what we have today?
I said 3 years for Iraq. ISIL is, and I've also described ISIL in general as a generational problem because of its allure in notably the Sunni sect of Islam. Look, we just have to have a Sunni partner in order to address this challenge of ISIL. And so, although I've said 3 years for Iraq, it's more like a generation, which I suppose is loosely defined as 20 years, to address the violent extremist allure of ISIL in the Sunni world. And that allure will only be stripped away when someone actually takes care of them and governs them. But to your question, are there points at which we should and would consider the introduction of additional U.S. military combat capabilities? The answer is yes. I think you've seen us do that in the raid that we conducted into Syria to capture and kill the group affiliated with Abu Sayyaf, the financial network of ISIL. And I think that we're always on the alert or always on the lookout for those opportunities and can use our capabilities as necessary to deal with those.
You feel that you're in a political appropriate position and that you would have the backing to step in when needed to take care of the problem when the time is right?
If you're asking, I can't answer what answer I would receive. I have the confidence that my recommendation would be accepted and debated in the context of everything else we're doing.
Let me help out here, if I may, Senator. I think that part of our strategy is to look for opportunities to do more in the sense of creating capable ground forces that we can support. So we kind of welcome those opportunities. We're taking those opportunities in the case of Syria. So I don't want to speak for the chairman, but in terms of is the opportunity to do more in that sense, not as a substitute for local people, but as a way of enabling them and assisting them. That really is the strategy. So I think we welcome those opportunities when we find them. We're trying to create those opportunities in the Sunni areas, as was noted earlier. We're taking some opportunities in the Kurdish area, and we hope that we have more, including in Syria.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but I would make one comment, and that is that it appears to me that if our strategy is waiting on other people to get their stuff in order, it doesn't seem to be as practical as taking advantage of and literally going out and proactively taking care of the problem if need be. And we've got the greatest fighting force in the world, and the last thing in the world I want to see is to have them engage boots on the ground. But if it means boots on the ground or additional folks there fighting there, as opposed to having a successful attack on this homeland, then I think we all agree on what we ought to be doing. And I just hope that this strategy includes that as a possibility.
Senator Heinrich.
Secretary, Chairman, welcome to you both. Thank you very much for your service. Let me start by saying that surge or no surge, I think it's pretty clear, at least to my constituents, that the Iraq War remains one of the greatest U.S. foreign policy mistakes of the last century, and one that I hope we've learned a few lessons from. I want to follow up, Secretary, on what Senator Hirono raised, and one lesson that I believe we should have learned by now is that eliminating one terrible Middle Eastern dictator can too often lead to even more brutal influences filling the leadership vacuum. We've seen that play out too many times. We've seen it to some extent in both Iraq and Libya. Should we be concerned that in Syria, a post-Assad reality could create a vacuum that ISIL is far better positioned to fill than any of the other regional forces? I'm not sure we should be, I think we should be almost as concerned with forces like al-Nusra Front. And if Assad does fall, shouldn't we have more than discussions on the table? Shouldn't we have a plan to make sure that some amount of governance remains, particularly in Damascus?
Well, yes, we should, and we do. That is our strategy with respect to the political transition. Now, for reasons that are easy to understand, our influence with Bashar Assad, that is U.S. influence, is not great. And so we are trying to influence those who influence him to remove himself from the government of Damascus while keeping intact the structures of governance for the very reason you adduce, which is we know what happens in these Middle Eastern countries when the structures of government disintegrate. And we would like to not see that happen in Syria, even though we know that the persistence of Assad at the helm in Damascus is in fact a fuel for ISIS and others who are fighting him. So he needs to go to remove that fuel, but we don't want to see the structures of governance go at the same time. And that is the challenge, but that's what we're trying to achieve.
Well, I think that's certainly the right goal. I just want to make sure we're prepared for that because we've sort of missed that ball in the past. Syria is an enormous country. And if we saw Damascus lose its governance capability, the implications for the entire region and the world would be enormous. Secretary Carter, as you mentioned as well, to be successful on the on the ground against ISIL, the fight needs to be led by local, capable ground forces. I don't think we should give in to impatience. These should not be Western forces. These should not be American forces. We've certainly heard that from our partners in places like Jordan. This means that we have to place a great deal of emphasis on training motivated and reliable partners, and you've gone a little bit over the small number of Iraqi security forces recruited, what some of those challenges are, the bottleneck related to the vetting process. But are there other factors that you would attribute for the lack of trainees? And I guess one of the questions I have related to that is, what steps, in addition to the steps that you're taking, what steps is the Iraqi government taking to address this shortfall in order to meet those kinds of training targets we'd like to see?
Thank you, Senator. I think in Iraq, the principal limiting factor on Sunni trainees, which is one of our focuses, has been their belief that the government in Baghdad was not fully supportive of them. That is the challenge before Prime Minister Abadi. He says he wants to do that, and that's critical because only Sunnis can take back Anbar. Only Sunnis can govern Anbar when it's all over. And so if we are going to wrest Anbar from the likes of ISIL, which we must do, we must have Sunnis on our side. And so Abadi is saying all the right things. As the chairman noted, we're trying to support him in doing all the right things. And for us,
so Secretary, I guess I agree with you wholeheartedly in your analysis. I guess my concern is Abadi doing enough to begin to generate confidence in the Sunni population in that region?
I think he is doing everything he personally can. I think he is challenged in Baghdad by others who would have it the old way, the sectarian way. And so he's not able to make everything happen when and as he said, and we've had some delays and some frustration as a result of that. I think things are getting better. We are getting more trainees. It was noted earlier that there is some confidence among Sunni tribes that we will help them train, equip them, support them, and get them back in the fight, and that there's a future for them, not even withstanding the difficulties of multi-sectarian governance in Iraq. That's the path we're on. And in the meantime, just to get back to something that Senator Rounds said, I think, and I said this before, I just want to restate it, we need to take action to defend ourselves against ISIL, not just in Iraq and Syria, but elsewhere, particularly foreign fighters, even as we defeat them in the place from which they arose. They have metastasized now, they aspire to be a global network, and we have to fight them where they are, and we can't wait for that. We need to do that, and by the way, we do that every day.
Secretary,
we did it this past weekend.
I want to leave you with one last question. It's a very general one. You may have seen the Politico article from a couple of days ago that examined what it called the Daesh effect. And it's sort of a modern example of the ancient proverb that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Whether it's Hamas or al-Nusra or Iran, there are a number of entities that may be enemies of the U.S., certainly enemies of our allies, but are currently share the same opposition to ISIL or Daesh. What are your thoughts on that observation generally, and wouldn't you agree that it's that reality that is part of the reason why this is such a complicated nut to crack?
It is a reason why it's complicated. And again, sectarianism is what brought us to this point. So we are willing to, and we are, and have supported elements of the Iraqi security forces that have a very large Shia composition. to them, but if and only if they're under the direction and control of the government of Iraq. And there are Shia forces in Iraq that are not under the direction of control, and we will not support them because that's sectarianism, that sectarian civil war. We know it leads down that road, and we're trying to stop Iraq from going down that road.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary and Chairman, for being with us today. I appreciate your efforts in this area. And Secretary Carter, I'd like to start with you because right now I am very confused. You had stated earlier, and then you affirmed to Senator Ayotte that we are directly arming the Kurds in consultation with the Iraqi government. Would you state that again, please, sir?
Yeah, although I want to, I mean, you're using the word directly, and she used the word directly, and I did too, but let me just be clear about that, which is that we do it in a way that doesn't delay the shipments and doesn't narrow down the shipments at all, but is by, through, and with the government of Iraq. We're sticking with that principle, not because we don't want to help the Kurds and we don't want to help them in a timely way, but because we also want to stick up for the principle of multi-sectarianism. So that is the reason, but we're insistent that it not lead to delays. And as I said, I spoke to Mr. Barzani when he was over here, and I make sure that he's getting the right kind of equipment, not just from us, but the Germans and all the others are arming him in a timely manner. And they are getting that equipment, and they're performing extremely well with it. Let me just see if the chair wants to add anything about the method of arming.
So we are arming the Kurds. It's not being delayed. I know that was stated earlier that there are no significant delays, because I do want to emphasize that, as you know, over the last several months, my colleagues, a number of my colleagues and I have been working on legislation to directly arm the Kurds in consultation with the Iraqi government. And I know that you and Secretary Kerry also had very strongly worded letters to the chairman of this committee emphasizing that we should not be directly arming the Kurds in consultation with the Iraqi government because there were no delays. And yet the president now has come out and said that we will be arming them in an expedited manner. Well, if there were no delays, I don't understand why now we need an additional, several hundred members of our armed services on the ground in Iraq, and that we're expediting the process. If there were no delays, we don't need to be expediting the process. So I just needed to clarify that because it was stated a number of times that we were directly arming the Kurds, which Secretary Kerry had said last year he doesn't have the authority, the president doesn't have the authority to do. I still believe we need to be directly arming them in consultation with the Iraqi government. Following the fall of Ramadi, General Dempsey, you stated that if the Kurds fail to take measures to be more inclusive with Sunnis, Kurds, or other groups, U.S. support for the central government could be curtailed. And, sir, considering the fall of the most western part of Iraq to ISIS, that didn't trigger a decision point on the part of the Iraqi government and its commitment to Iraq, or, I'm just not sure what else the Iraqi government needs to fail at before the administration changes its strategy and how we support our willing partners in Iraq. The Kurdish Peshmerga, they are willing partners, they are, and I think we need to do more for them. We cannot defeat ISIS in Iraq by continuing to beg, hope, and pray that the sectarian Iraqi government, which is still overshadowed, we've heard it a number of times by, previous Prime Minister Maliki and Iran. We don't think that they will vigorously defend the Iraqi people equally. I don't believe they will. But we've talked also about being more inclusive. That was mentioned again. More inclusive. I hear this time and time again. But what I would like a definition of what does more inclusive look like, and how do we measure more inclusive? Gentlemen, if you would address that, please.
I would begin by noting the words of Prime Minister Abadi when he was here. I think he used the word decentralized Iraq. And that is one in which there is a central government in Baghdad and an integral state of Iraq. But there is substantial opportunity for self-determination around the country, among Sunnis, among Shias, and among Kurds. And it seems to me that's a wise way of approaching what multi-sectarianism means. I think a government in Baghdad that allows the different parties there a degree of self-determination to maintain security within their own territory and to govern themselves, share in things like the oil wealth of the country and so forth. That is what he says he is for. And that's the way he described it when he was here in Washington to all of that. And that is, in my judgment, certainly better than the alternative, which is sectarian disintegration, which could still occur in Iraq. But I think we all looking into that abyss know what resides there. It's further violence for the citizens of Iraq and further opportunity for groups like ISIL that aren't preoccupied with the long-term welfare of the territories they occupy. They want to use them for further violence. So that is Prime Minister Abadi's definition, and I think we're trying to support him in his aspiration to make good on that definition.
Thank you, General. Anything to add there?
Just to, militarily, what we'll be watching for in terms of the intentions of the government of Iraq and its control over groups that are not directly responsive to the Ministry of Defense is whether there's retribution, whether they allow. It was Tikrit I was speaking about, I think, Senator. As these families come back to Tikrit after it was recaptured, I think we are watching, and it's worth watching, on whether they are able to return to their homes or not. I think the same will be true once Ramadi is recaptured. And we'll probably be watching how the campaign in Fallujah unfolds to ensure that the popular mobilization forces propagate a campaign that's not characterized by retribution and dramatic collateral damage. Those are all things to watch carefully.
I think we have willing partners there. I think we need to assist those willing partners. One further comment, too, just very briefly, is you had stated you haven't seen a request list from the Kurds on the type of equipment and arms that they need. Is that correct?
No, I have seen such requests. We've honored such requests. We've shipped a lot of equipment, and I should once again repeat, it's not just the United States. There are a number of countries that are equipping the Kurds, and in some cases they prefer the equipment of other countries. For example, German anti-tank weapons, and that's absolutely fine with us, and the Germans are providing those.
That is one thing I know that President Barzani had also presented to us during his visit with the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that and that they have provided a list of equipment.
They did. We discussed exactly the same list.
Okay, very good.
And I've discussed it with others who are, for example, the German defense minister I mentioned when I was in Germany a couple of weeks ago, her commitment to do exactly the same, and they've done a great job of equipping the Kurds. And that's an example of a competent ground force that also governs within the territory that it controls. And that's really what we're looking for in that entire region. It's going to be hard to get, but it's what we're looking for.
Well, they are there, and I know they're willing. So thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses today. I have a number of questions and concerns about the ongoing mission against ISIL, which I'll address, but I've got to begin by just saying my concerns about the administration strategy pale next to my concerns about Congress and what Congress is doing. What Congress is supposed to do is to provide a budget to you to defend the nation and win this battle. And Congress is supposed to authorize a war that is now 11 months in. And we've not done either. We're not giving you a budget. We are using a gimmick, and whether the gimmick is the gimmicks of the past, continuing resolutions, or the current gimmick du jour, which is a use of non-recurring OCO funding, we're not giving you the budget. And we're not doing it because, let's just be blunt, Congress to this point has decided that the budget caps enacted in August of 2011 is a higher national priority than defeating ISIL. And as long as we view that as a higher national priority than defeating ISIL, we're not going to give you the budget that you need. It is my hope, as you testified, Secretary Carter, that we will find a better path, something like a Murray-Ryan budget deal. I know the chair has been significant in speaking out for this as well, but we're not doing what we ought to be doing on the budget side. And we are also not doing what we ought to be doing under Article 1, Section 8, which is declaring war. Tomorrow is the 11th month anniversary of the initiation of the bombing campaign in Sinjar and Erbil. We've spent $3 billion. We've got 3,500 people deployed away from their families, risking their lives. And aside from a single vote in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in December, there has not been House committee action or floor debate of any significance. There's not been any meaningful debate on the Senate floor about whether or not we should be engaged in this war, even though 3/4 of the members of Congress, by my estimation, believe that there should be U.S. military action against ISIL with some differences in detail. But we don't want to have a debate and vote because we don't want to put our names on it. We don't want to be held accountable for a vote. So we can criticize all we want, and I'll get into some criticisms, but bottom line, Congress is not doing either of the two things we are uniquely supposed to do: provide you a budget to win and authorize war. And that, I think we could make our criticisms have a much greater legitimacy if, as an institution, we would do what we are supposed to do. I just returned from the region, and just some quick summaries. Senator Donnelly mentioned it. We are achieving some significant successes against ISIL in some parts of the battlefield. In Iraq and Syria, largely in the areas where we are relying on partners with the Kurds, the KRG, regional government in Iraq, and then Kurds in the north of Syria. President Barzani, we met him on Sunday in Erbil, I guess 2 Sundays ago, and he said this, and this is very important, especially for any who would say the U.S. doesn't have a strategy. He said, "Thank you to the United States of America. If the president had not started a bombing campaign on August 8th near Erbil, we might not be here today." That bombing campaign likely helped save the existence of the KRG, which has been a good partner. And they lead with that. They don't lead with, "We're not getting weapons." They don't lead with, "We don't like working with Baghdad." They lead with, "Thank you to the United States for helping save us, save our region, save our way of life." And that's important for us to acknowledge, because that wasn't by accident. That's a strategy. We helped save an important ally by acting, the president acting when he did. There are challenges, too. The Iraqi unification challenge was very patent as we met with Prime Minister Abadi. And there's mixed reviews, positive on the intent, but mixed on the follow-through. In the Sunni area in particular, a lot of criticism. Some support. The Anbar governor supports what Prime Minister Abadi is doing, but a lot of the tribal leaders don't, and a lot of the tribal leaders don't think we're doing what we can do. And when they look at what we're doing with the Kurds and they compare with what we're not doing with them, it sticks in their craw. And finally, the challenges in Syria are significant. Let me ask you this question. Today, front page article in the Washington Post dealing with the routing of ISIL in northern Syria. Quote, "The unexpected rout of Islamic State forces across a wide arc of territory in the northeastern Syria heartland has exposed vulnerabilities in the ranks of the militants and also the limits of the U.S.-led strategy devised to confront them. Islamic State fighters have been driven out of a third of their flagship province of Raqqa in recent weeks by a Kurdish-led force that has emerged as one of the most effective American partners in the war. The offensive, backed by U.S. airstrikes, has deprived the militants of control of their most important border crossing with Turkey and forced them onto the defensive in their self-proclaimed capital of Raqqa City, something that would have been unthinkable as recently as a month ago." That's what's happening right now. But every success has a challenge, and there's a worm in this apple, and the worm is this. as we have succeeded in our partnership with the Kurds in northern Syria, it's caused grave concern by the Turkish government. It's caused grave concern by a number of the other Sunni forces in Syria that we're partnering with. How do we continue to manage the Kurds to be successful in the battle against ISIL and partner with them to be successful without causing additional undue challenges in our effort to also help Sunnis be successful against ISIL?
Thank you. And by the way, thank you once again for traveling there. It's much appreciated. Let me start with the Turks. Turkey has a long common border with both Syria and Iraq, which has remained disturbingly permeable to foreign fighters and to resupply throughout the course of this conflict. And we have some people actually talking to the Turks just today, as the chairman alluded to a while ago, in order to try to get the Turks to up their game. They are a NATO ally. They have a strong stake in things, in stability to their south. I believe they could do more along the border. And so in the meantime, it is true, the Kurds are acting, and because the Kurds are capable of acting, we are supporting them, and that is successful, and it does threaten Raqqa. I think the tension with respect to the Sunnis is best managed in the way that we're hoping Prime Minister Abadi will manage it, namely by letting them each succeed within their own territory, defeat ISIL, and have substantial, his word is decentralization of governance in Iraq that allows them a substantial opportunity to determine their own destiny within the territory that they control. That is what multi-sectarianism in Iraq would mean. As you indicated, it's a lot tougher in Syria, but that's the objective that we have, to have Sunnis. I would like to see the Sunni tribesmen tribal leaders that you met with be as successful as the Kurds are. We would welcome that. That's what we're trying to stimulate in Al-Taqaddum and so forth. And we're willing to do more, as the chairman indicated and I indicated, when we have a capable ground force that we can support the way we did support over the weekend the Kurds in the north with air power.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I also want to just agree with a line of your questioning earlier. I think it would be absolutely foolish for us to not clarify the rules of engagement for the Syrian-trained folks inserted back into the field to make clear that the U.S. will support them if they come under attack by the Assad regime. For them to go back in without a guarantee on that score would seem, we would lose all credibility if we don't provide that. And I just would encourage the administration to clarify that aspect of the rules of engagement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you, Senator. I have been asking that question for a long time, and I keep getting the answer, well, we haven't made that policy decision. It's shameful. Shameful to send people in and not assure them that we will defend them against attacks by barrel bombs. Senator Graham.
Thank you. To build on what we're just talking about, do we have the legal authority to assist the Free Syrian Army that we train against Assad? Is there a doubt about that?
I am not sure about the legalities of it, Senator, to be quite honest. I'm not...
Let's just put it this way. If there's any doubt about whether or not we have the legal authority to protect the troops we train against Assad, please let the committee know. You don't have to answer right now, but that's a big decision. If there's a lack of legal authority, I want to know why and what can we do to fix it.
Appreciate it, and I'll take that back. I appreciate that thought.
Yeah, General Dempsey, thank you for decades of service. I really appreciate that. General Dempsey, would you agree that there are more terrorist organizations with more safe havens, with more weapons, with more capability, with more men to strike the homeland than any time since 9/11?
Thank you for your service. I know you retired recently. Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that ISIL is expanding in other countries as we speak?
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to Iraq, do you both agree that partitioning Iraq into 3 separate countries is probably not a viable strategy?
I certainly agree with that, yes.
Do you agree that the Sunni world would object to giving the southern part of Iraq to Iran? That's what would happen, right, if we partition the South? Do you all agree with that?
Yeah, that sounds like sectarianism to me, and
Yeah,
we know what lies down that road.
And independent Kurdistan is going to create a lot of upheaval with Turkey and the region at large. Do you agree with that? A separate independent state.
For the Turks, a separate independent state would be very problematic. And within Iraq, I think a substantial autonomy within a decentralized but integral Iraq is still possible. That's what Abadi's trying to do.
I agree. Do you agree with that, General?
I do, sir.
Yeah, so partitioning, I think, is not a viable strategy. As to the Kurds, do any of you believe, either one of you believe that the Kurds have the ability, will, to go in to liberate Ramadi?
I'll start that. I think they may have the ability, and we are obviously trying to facilitate their movement south. Whether they have the will is another matter. The only reason that I say that is that they're getting at that point to the edge of the territory that is Kurdish.
Well, that's my point, is for anybody to suggest that the Kurds are the answer to all of our problems, they don't, quite frankly, know the Mideast. I mean, the Kurds are not going to liberate Syria. Do you all agree with that? They'll be part of the component, but they're not going to be the liberating force.
Right, part of the component, absolutely.
As to Assad, what's more likely? President Obama leaves office in 2017, or Assad goes first?
It's certain that President Obama will leave.
Yeah, no, I know that.
And then, so that's an easy question, but then it ends
what's
up
gonna-
turning
who's
on
gonna
whether
leave
Assad
first?
will be in power then.
Yeah. Who leaves first, Obama or Assad?
Well, I certainly hope it's Assad.
Yeah, I do, but I don't think so. So the bottom line, if Assad stays in power, do you worry about Jordan and Lebanon being a victim of the war in Syria if it continues the way it's going? That Jordan and Lebanon will become a casualty of the war in Syria?
Well, I think Jordan and Lebanon are already suffering from the effects of war in Syria. They're hosting
we could have
refugees.
right. It could even get worse.
That's exactly the concern we should all have about, one of the concerns we should have about what's going on in Syria. It's not just the Syrian people, it's the neighbors as well.
Do you agree with me that no Arab force is going to go in and fight ISIL alone unless you put Assad on the table?
I see what you're getting at, and it gets back to our train and equip program, and we are finding people who whose principal security fear for their own people, and this is really for their own villages, is ISIL.
Well,
and so they're willing to go and fight against ISIL. There are others who want to fight against Assad,
Sure,
and it's another matter
here's my point. They're recruiting more foreign fighters than we're training Free Syrian Army. The math doesn't work. This is never going to result in Assad or ISIL being degraded or destroyed. The only way I see ISIL to be degraded or destroyed is for a ground force, regional in nature, to go into Syria. Do you agree with me that no ground force made up of Turks, Saudis, Egyptians, you name it, are going into Syria to fight ISIL unless one of the goals is to replace Assad? They're not going to give half of Syria to Iran.
That sounds sensible to me, and I certainly wish that such a force would be created. I mean, one of the great disappointments in all of this is that the Sunni world more broadly isn't more involved in this fight.
Okay, let's dig into that for a moment. If we went to Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia tomorrow and said, we would like to use your armies, we'll be integrated, would you agree with me for them to say yes, that we would have to make Assad a target of that army? And are we willing to do that?
Let's see. I would guess that it's very hypothetical because sadly none of them has indicated
Well,
a
here's what
willingness
they've
to do
told me.
anything of that kind under any circumstances.
Here's what they've
but
told me.
I see what you're driving
Thank you.
at, which is will the rest of the Sunni Middle East participate in this conflict more? I certainly wish they would. The one answer I know, Senator, is for the Turks. The
Can I
Turks
say-
have stated their
Yes.
position, which is that they definitely want Assad to go, and the conditions for any other participation so far has been that they want to fight against Assad.
Well, I would suggest you do the following, and you travel a lot. We went to Qatar, went to Saudi Arabia, we went all over the Mideast, and they told us to a person, we would gladly join forces with you upon the condition that Assad is part of the target set. And nobody in the United States will tell them whether or not we're willing to take Assad on militarily as part of the ground force. So I would suggest, instead of being upset with the Sunni Arab world, that our problems lie within ourselves, that we're not putting Assad on the table militarily. Do you agree with that? Do you think Assad is on the table militarily?
Senator, as I'm sure you know, his position on the battlefield is more tenuous today than it has been for a long time.
And I don't mean,
Our-
it is, but the point is our efforts designed to take Assad out militarily, or are we focusing just on ISIL?
No, our approach has been, as I think has been stated clearly for some time, to try to find a political exit for Bashar Assad rather than a U.S. led military exit. That is the approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank both of you for your decades of service, and that includes you, Mr. Secretary, because you have given decades. I want to follow up on that line of questioning. So if Assad exited tomorrow, what would be the likely strategy that we would use going forward?
Our strategy would be to encourage the moderate opposition to partner with the structures of the government of Damascus, not directly associated with Assad or with his deplorable behavior, and I think we can determine what that is, keep the structures of government in place, unify with the moderate Syrian opposition, and create a new government which is more reflective of the aspirations of the populace than Assad's is, and then they would in turn need to go and reclaim their territory from ISIL, and I think the United States and the rest of the international coalition would be pleased to support them in that.
And does Assad exiting sooner rather than later, does that create conditions that are so chaotic for the interests of the United States, or is the interest of the United States in him leaving sooner than later?
I think sooner, and in a way, as I indicated, that the reason for, to get back to the earlier line of questioning, for a political rather than a military transition, for us to support and seek that, is that it is less disruptive, less chaotic, less sparks sectarianism and therefore violence. That's why it's much to be preferred over a simple toppling of Assad, because you don't know what's on the other side of a simple toppling of Assad. So I know it's unsatisfying to talk about a political transition when he himself gives very little indication of wanting to do that. But that is much to be preferred if we can have that. Otherwise, we know what happens when these countries disintegrate.
And were a political solution to be found for his exit, which of course is going to be difficult with Iran being his mentor. But Vladimir Putin could be instrumental in arranging some kind of exit strategy. But were it to be a political solution, do you think it reasonable that there would be some accommodation so that the Alawite minority would not be slaughtered?
I think there has to be that ingredient. I mean, first of all, the Alawite community will fight for the territory in the Northwest, but once again, that's just further conflict, further civil war, and ethnic cleansing of any kind is the kind of thing you could see on the other side of a collapse there, and we know how tragic that is for people.
What would his arranged exit do with regard to Hezbollah, and will they resist it the whole way?
Hezbollah has been one of the principal supporters of the Assad regime, so they do not give any indication of welcoming the path that we're discussing here. The Russians, perhaps, and I know that we've been in contact with the Russians about that over the years, and certainly I think that they would, if they threw their weight behind such a transition, be influential with Assad. And so I certainly hope they would, but I have no confidence as I sit here right now that they will.
Mr. Secretary, when you look at a map like this, a map of Syria that I assume you handed out, somebody did, that's a mess. And maybe it is the only solution, is the solution of a political exit for Assad, so that we can go after these extremist elements. By the way, I had to leave the committee to do an interview on CNN, and the whole focus that they wanted to jump on was your statement earlier in the hearing that we had only trained up 60. But I pointed out to them what you said was the vetting is very difficult, and in fact, we are vetting several thousands additional, and the vetting is a lot more torturous because you certainly don't want to have a guy trained up and then he turns around and aims his gun back at us. In Iraq, do you think that this new prime minister has the capability of getting out of his Shiite mold? And does he have the capability of bringing in all the Shiites with all of the Iranian influence in his government in order to reach out with an olive branch to the Sunnis?
Thank you. And with respect to the first part of your remarks, I'm always going to be truthful with you. And the number is 60. And I think we've stated that number before, but I said it today, and I'll always tell the truth. And that is a small class. It results from the fact that that is the number that got through the very rigorous vetting and selection process we have. The General Nagata, who runs that program, believes that he has learned a lot. He has 7,000 behind that, so I expect those numbers to increase. But I wanted to tell the truth, and I did tell the truth. We expect that number to improve, but you deserve to know where things stand, and I'm telling you where things stand. And with respect to Abadi, there I'd say also that he has indicated to us, and he's here in Washington, I believe he spoke to many of you as well, his intention to proceed in a way that is distinctly different from the way his predecessor proceeded, and which led to the situation we now have in Iraq. We're certainly supporting him in that regard, but one can see that his intentions are contested in Baghdad. And so we continue to support him. We continue to think, to get back to the earlier line of question, that a multi-sectarian future for Iraq is the best for stability and peace and the best for the defeat of ISIL. But he will have some substantial influence over that, but it's clear he doesn't have absolute control in Baghdad. We are supporting him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Secretary Carter and General Dempsey, for being here today. And General Dempsey, I especially want to thank you for your decades of service to your country and to the cause of freedom. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors, and I'm not sure whether this will be the last time we're privileged to speak with you in a hearing, but regardless, please know how much we appreciate all you've done for our country. And I want to thank the men and women who are deployed in Iraq and in so many other places in the Middle East for their service to our country. Although they've not been labeled combat troops, they're still operating under dangerous and uncertain circumstances and are far removed from their families and from the people they love. I want to follow up on the discussion between Senator McCain and Secretary Carter on how we might support Syrian rebels once they return from training. Mr. Secretary, you stated that you believe we have an obligation to those we train to provide them with protection, and I agree with that. And I also believe we have an obligation to let the American people know, and that you have an obligation to let Congress know and help us to fully understand what this strategy entails, what that means, and the funding, the time, and the effort that providing any such protection might entail, and what it will necessitate. So can you tell us, when will the Department of Defense fully explain to the American people and to Congress what this strategy will involve, what it's going to cost our government? I've said this before, but this is something that that should have been made clear last year when the President came up with this plan. But regardless, it's better late than never. It's good that we do it now rather than not at all. Can you tell us when that might occur?
I'll continuously tell you what's going on over there with respect to what we're doing in Iraq and what we're doing with respect to Syria, and we're going to have to, as I said, I think we have an obligation to support those fighters when they go in there. We're going to have to decide exactly under what conditions and what way we'll make that tactical decision when we introduce them. But I think the main thing is that we increase that number from what is now a very small number, and I'm not surprised that it's running on television, into a much larger number. I think we can do that, and the officer who runs this program believes that he will be able to do that, and we'll keep you apprised of our progress, and I'll tell you every day what I know, as I've done here today.
Thank you. I appreciate that and look forward to that. Now, U.S. strategy in Syria is to empower the quote-unquote moderate opposition to defeat ISIS and to put enough pressure on the Assad regime to achieve some type of negotiated peace settlement. For the sake of discussion, let's say that these moderates are successful in degrading ISIS to the point that they're no longer a factor in Syria. What does pressuring Assad or his supporters into a negotiated settlement look like at that point, especially given the military support from Iran and Hezbollah that they currently enjoy? Specifically, what role will the United States play in bringing about the pressure and support to achieve this kind of settlement?
I think the way it would look, the outcome that we are aiming for, is one in which Bashar al-Assad and those who have been associated with his atrocities in Syria are removed, but the structures of government in Damascus and in Iraq that remain continue on, are in an inclusively governed way that is multi-sectarian, to include Alawites and others, and that can then turn to the task of regaining its sovereign territory from ISIL to the east in a project that would look like what we are working with Baghdad to accomplish to its west in Iraq. That is the post-Assad transition that would be the best for the Syrian people and the best for our counter-ISIL strategy.
By the way, do you believe the 2001 authorization for the use of military force gives authority necessary to engage the Assad regime forces that may come into conflict with any rebels we may train?
I'm going to be very careful about how I answer a legal question in that regard, and I'd prefer to get back to you in that regard.
Okay. Now, Mr. Secretary, what level of command and control, in your opinion, does ISIS leadership have over these various affiliate groups across the Middle East and Northern Africa, as well as lone wolf individuals or groups in Europe and the Western Hemisphere?
It's mixed, but in the main, not entirely, but in the main, what one sees is a mixture of groups that were already radicalized and already intent upon attacking the West or attacking Western interests or destabilizing places in the Middle East, rebranding themselves as ISIL because of this seeming success it had. And then to get to the lone wolf part, you see people who have had no training, no association with it, including Americans, who go on the internet and find themselves enthralled because whatever lost souls they are, enthralled by the violence or whatever associated with ISIL, and self-radicalize and unfortunately undertake to do violence. So you see that spectrum there. You do see some effort by ISIL, meaning ISIL in Syria and Iraq, to command and control, but it's not exclusively that way. And I say all this because that's very distinctly different from the al-Qaeda model. The al-Qaeda model was a very hierarchical, very clear command and control type terrorist enemy. And that meant they had discipline, and it meant they could take on big things like 9/11. But it also meant that when we started to go after them, they were vulnerable to attacks on the command and control structure and on their logistics structure. ISIL is more resilient because it is more decentralized and informal.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman McCain asked that I recognize Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to this country, and I especially want to thank you, General Dempsey, for the many, many years that you have served the people of this country and the military families that have been under you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Carter, earlier Senator Rounds had a conversation with General Dempsey about the act of patience and time, and I know the General's counseled patience, and he has discussed time. What role do you see time playing in our strategy? You know, do we have a strategy on forces, on containing ISIL? Are we going to allow them to be able to maintain control of territory for the next 3 to 5 years? Is that going to be acceptable to us? And do you see risks with that type of strategy?
Well, I think we're going to continue to strike and apply pressure to ISIL throughout this period. We're doing it now. We do it every day. It's had some effect. And we're going to continue every single day, as we did over this past weekend, to defend ourselves against ISIL, including these homegrown people. All that will go on and has to go on because we have to protect ourselves in the meantime. What takes the time, and I think this is what the chairman was getting at, what takes the time is, and this is just in the nature of things, getting a lasting result. A lasting result is one where not only is ISIL defeated, but they stay defeated. And in order for them to stay defeated, there has to be somebody on that territory who is keeping the peace and governing and replacing the ISIL in the territory. And that takes some time. We see ourselves, we're working with the Kurds to do that. We're working with Sunni tribes, but that's in the nature of things. We want that to go as quickly as possible. And we're hastening that to the best of our ability, as are other members of the coalition. But that is the thing that takes the time to build. But in the meantime, we have to protect ourselves, and we have to keep pressure on ISIL, and we'll be doing that constantly.
I agree with you on that, but as, General, certainly.
Would you mind? I'd like to, because I've thought about this a lot. Your question is really whether patience increases risk. That's really your question. And I think patience probably does increase risk to the mission somewhat because it extends the time when other things could happen, right? But I think were we to take more responsibility directly and unilaterally, that would certainly increase risk in another way. It increases risk to our force and increases risk to the other missions that we're held accountable to accomplish globally. What I get paid for is to give advice to the Secretary of Defense with the JCS and the President on managing risk. So to your question, does risk increase due to patience? Of course. But the alternative increases risk in other ways, and it's our job to manage that risk.
As you look at managing that risk and you look at balancing it, how do you reach a decision where you can maintain that patience when you know that when ISIL controls that territory that they have now and they continue to advance in other areas, whether it would be in the region or in Russia, that is a recruitment item for them, that it will inspire attacks, whether it's in that region or elsewhere around the world. How do you balance that and have the risk that we face in our homeland continue, what I think would be continue to grow because of possibly an overabundance of patients?
Yeah, I'll keep at it because, as I said, this is the issue on which the campaign turns, correct? So what you have to be assured of is that as we manage risk, we look at those things which could threaten U.S. persons and facilities around the globe and the homeland. And where we see risk accruing that could have threatened that national security interest, there's no hesitance for us to act unilaterally and decisively. On the other hand, this campaign is built on the premise that it relies upon other actors. That necessarily requires a degree of patience that we need to nurture, we need to reinforce, and we need to understand in the context of the other things we're trying to accomplish, not only in the Middle East, but globally. So if you're suggesting that ISIL's threat to the homeland could increase because of this patience, I concede that risk. We take on board the responsibility to manage it. But I would also suggest to you that we would contribute mightily to ISIL's message as a movement were we to confront them directly on the ground in Iraq and Syria.
If we look at patience, if we look at restraint, don't you think that with our restraint, we're in many ways encouraging the Iraqis to look elsewhere and to especially look to Iran and invite them into Iraq where they are, because they know that that Iran will be there fighting a common enemy that they both face at this point? Aren't we opening that door to Iran with this, what I kind of view as an overabundance of patience, which to me is the greatest risk?
Yeah, look, when you look at what we're doing, we're trying to, by the way, the government of Iran has been reaching out to Iran since roughly 2004, and they have probably increased their outreach to Iran, but it has very little to do with what we're doing or not doing. It has everything to do with the fact that they believe that their future is, that it's their turn, and that their particular form of governance, which is not yet inclusive as it needs to be, is the right form of governance. So they were going to do this whether we're there or not, and whatever manner in which we exert our influence.
So they have boots on the ground in Iraq through no action of the United States or inaction by the United States.
I would say that they're the advisors that have been sent, the ISR that they're flying, and some of the other capabilities they provided to the government of Iraq, I would agree with you that they would have provided that whether we were there.
It was a question, it wasn't a statement on my part.
The answer is, yeah, they would have been there regardless of our actions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for the testimony today. General Dempsey, I want to join my colleagues in commending you for your decades of service, and Secretary Carter, it's good getting caught up last week. Appreciate your outstanding service as well to our country. You know, there's been a lot of criticism of the President when he, in August 2014, and then just a couple of weeks ago at the G7 meeting, talked about how we don't have a strategy yet with regard to ISIS. He said that in 2014. He again said it again just a couple of weeks ago. But what he really has not been criticized for, and I think is something that I'd like to get your view on, is each time he's talked about the lack of a strategy, he's essentially kind of put it on your plate. Each time he's said, well, the guys at the Department of Defense are kind of coming up with options, still haven't gotten them yet. DOD's working this. Literally said that, a version of that in August of 2014 and in June of 2015. Did it take the Department of Defense a year to come up with a strategy to defeat ISIS?
I'll take start of that. First of all, thank you for your conversation. Thanks for everything you're doing, especially with respect to our Asia-Pacific strategy, Senator. Very grateful for that and your travels there and your leadership. We just spoke yesterday at the Pentagon with the President about his strategy, and the strategy is the one that
you've laid out.
I described today.
Okay, so he can't.
By the way, he described 8 or 9 months ago, and that doesn't. And this is important. It involves us, and we have an important role.
Right.
But it involves other parts of the government as well. That's one of the reasons to keep laboriously citing 9 lines of effort. There really are 9 lines of effort. You know, we don't directly, for example, try to interdict self-radicalized Americans.
Yeah.
The FBI does that. We don't do that, but we've got to do that while we're working on these difficult problems of Iraq.
No, Mr. Secretary, I agree 100% with that, and that's why, to me, again, it was a little bit, and maybe you just can't answer the question directly. I wish you would, but the fact that the President, it just goes to some of the process here. The fact that the President, for years, has essentially been saying, we don't have a strategy, and it's because the guys over at DOD still haven't given me one, to me is not, it's not how we develop strategy, as you just mentioned. This strategy needs to be all instruments of American power. The military is clearly one, but we need economic, energy, finance, diplomatic, the whole list. And that, of course, has to be developed by the White House, not by the Department of Defense. So I don't think it took a year for the Pentagon to come up with a strategy. And despite the fact that the president, each time he said we don't have a strategy, said that it was essentially your fault. I don't think it was your fault. I think it was the White House's fault. And I just want to be on record saying that I think that's unfair criticism to be put at the chairman or the secretary to say, we don't have a strategy yet, and it's because DOD. But I guess he now can say we do have a strategy. Is this the strategy?
This is the strategy, and it is devised by the president and the White House. We play a role in it.
Right.
So I did not observe any waiting for us to come up with a strategy.
Well, he actually said it twice.
The strategy that I've described, the 9 lines of effort, was, I think, first described the end of last summer. It makes common sense that our strategy has all the parts that the 9 lines of effort describe. Yesterday's meeting was to give him an update and to get his guidance on how we go forward. We did that. It wasn't just, it happened to be at the Pentagon, and the focus was on the 2 of the 9 lines of effort that we're responsible for, but there were other members of the national security community, which is essential to this, who were present and participated in that discussion. And so,
okay, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, you don't have to answer this, but I don't assume it took a year for the military to come up with options for the president. But
well, no, I'd be happy to answer it because we're frequently and constantly adapting options. But the context of when he said that was he had asked us, is there something more we need to be doing with the Sunni tribes? That's the context of the question. So the real issue is whether we should be doing more with the Sunni tribes, and the outcome of that conversation and the planning that went into it was the Taqadum Air Base Train, Advise, and Assist platform.
Thank you. Let me turn. I know there's been some discussion with regard to the NDAA, and I think it's a good bill, very bipartisan bill. Senator Reid and Chairman McCain should be commended for the great work they did. One of the things that we try and do in the bill in a number of areas is bolster the credibility where the United States is seen as having a strategy both supported by the executive branch and the legislative branch. And some of us think that our credibility in certain areas of the world has been weak, and it's been one of the weaknesses of our national security and foreign policy strategy. But we tried to do that in a number of areas, and I just want to provide 2 examples. You kind of hinted at one, Mr. Secretary, the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. There's some strong language in there about the support for that from the Congress, very bipartisan, and how we need to be increasing troops in the Asia-Pacific. Also very much a focus that I think is an area that, Mr. Secretary, you said we're late in the game in the Arctic. And you may have seen, if you haven't, I would recommend you take a look at it. The Newsweek this week talks about a cover story on the Arctic. The title is actually, "In the Race to Control the Arctic, the U.S. Lags Behind." It talks about how this is developing as the new great game, and Kipling's famous phrase about a critical strategic area, how the Russians are very, very involved in the Arctic. Mr. Chairman, you actually, in testimony from this committee, talked about the 4 new combat brigades that they're standing up, a new Arctic brigade, their exercise in the last couple months. And then the comment on the Coast Guard is essentially saying it's a new geopolitical Cold War the U.S. is in danger of losing. We're not even playing in this game at all. So I just wanted to ask a final comment, Mr. Chairman. You talked about managing risks, Mr. Chairman. Would removing our only airborne brigade, BCT, in the Arctic, our only BCT in the Asia-Pacific, what would that do to our credibility? Would that bolster our credibility in the Arctic or Asia-Pacific with regard to the rebalance? And you talked about managing risks. Certainly seems to me as Vladimir Putin is militarizing this part of the world, if we're actually removing forces, our only Arctic trained forces, that's a way to increase risk, because we know he views weakness as being provocative. They're making a move in the Arctic. If we start withdrawing troops, the 425 in particular, I think that heightens risk. Would either of you care to comment on that?
Yes, I think it increases risk, but some of the decisions, and you're talking about the Army in this case, but some of the choices that the service chiefs are going to have to make as we continue to go down in terms of resources. You know, the Army is tasked with going from 490,000 active where they are today to 450 in the next 2 years, and they got to come from someplace. And
But to put that BCT on the block first, to me, is inviting, A, the Congress is saying don't do it in the NDAA, but secondly, that's going to undermine our credibility, not only in the Arctic, it's going to undermine our rebalance to the Asia-Pacific strategy. Those are PACOM forces.
I'm not going to predispose the Army's decision, although it sounds like you may already have some insight.
No, I don't. I'm just making
Okay,
sure the Army
but-
doesn't make a strategic
Right.
blunder.
Although I will tell you this, Senator, we are familiar with the Congress telling us no on the reforms that we're making, not because we're trying to cut ourselves apart, but because we've got $1 trillion, that's a T, not a B, $1 trillion less in budget authority over 10 years. We've said from the beginning, it's a disaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just do want to mention that if we're looking at BCTs going to the area where the Congress has actually said we need to increase forces, having our only Asia-Pacific Arctic capability, which, as you know, General, you can't develop overnight, and our only airborne capability in the entire Asia-Pacific, to me, that would be a strategic blunder. And I think Congress sometimes comes in and has broader strategic insights than the military has on occasion, not always. But in my view, this time is one of them.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, let me thank you for your testimony, and I personally want to thank you for your service to the nation, both of you, particularly General Dempsey, as you conclude your uniform service. And again, with Chairman McCain's direction, I will adjourn the hearing. Thank you.